Hello crafty friends, I'm Lien from Studio Cato and I'm so glad you're joining me again today. Today I'm back with another card for Reverse Confetti and I made a really simple die cut inlay design today. So let's get right into it. I started by stamping this wonderful fairy from the Enchanted Garden stamp set by Reverse Confetti onto some watercolor cardstock. This is the Canson Mauval 200 GSM watercolor cardstock, and I stamped that image in Versafine Onyx Black so I could emboss it with Wow Clear Gloss Superfine Embossing Powder. I really like the look of embossing powder, but also I like to watercolor my images like I'm doing right here. And embossing powder is really helpful for that because the raised edges make it so it's harder for the different colors of paints to bleed together, even when they're not perfectly dry and you're painting areas right next to each other. So it's really handy for watercolor. I'm speeding through this coloring because I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm using really soft colors to color in this fairy. I'm using some pinks. I mixed a purple-ish color, what's it called? Periwinkle, I guess, and some oranges because I really like oranges and pinks together. And then I'm painting the hair as well. And the hair took me the most time. I used a lot of different layers and a lot of different browns to get the exact color I wanted. And in between each layer of paint, I am letting the previous layers dry completely so I don't mess up any of my previous coloring. I set that aside to dry while I worked on my background. I die cut a rectangle so it would have a nice stitched border, and then I also used the circle element die by Reverse Confetti to die cut that gorgeous radiant background. I then ink blended over it with the Ice Aqua from Reverse Confetti. I think that's the name of this ink. I'm not entirely sure, so I will leave it listed down below. Now, if I was to make this card again, I would ink it up first and then die cut, because as you saw, the die cutting makes it so the ink blending isn't perfectly smooth. It gets darker around the edges of the die cut. On the back of that piece, once I was done, I put some painter's tape just to fill up all those negative spaces. And that makes it so I can easily glue things on there to do some die cut inlay. I prefer using the painter's tape instead of gluing a cardstock backing onto it, because that often gets messy with the glue seeping out of the little negative spaces. So this is what I prefer doing. Now, I don't trust the painter's tape to be sticky enough, so to glue in all of my glitter cardstock, I die cut the same die out of silver glitter cardstock. I do put a dab of glue, some Barely Art Precision Craft glue, into the openings and then pop in the tiny die cuts using my jewel pickers. So that's really easy to do for die cut inlay. I always use my jewel pickers for those because those are often tiny pieces and they are perfect to be picked up with that tool. I then stamped a sentiment in that same bold black and I embossed that with Wow Clear Gloss as well. I used my Misty for that because it is a really bold sentiment and I wanted it to be perfectly black. I also cut 4 extra layers of thick white cardstock, or maybe 6, sometimes I do 6, and I put those behind the panel I created, so to give it a little bit more dimension. And my glue is acting up a little bit there. I'm not sure what happened because I always keep the pin in, but sometimes it still gets clogged for some reason. So that's not too great, but it's also not too much of a hassle to fix it. So I just glued that onto my top folding horizontal card base, and then I can put my fairy on there with some foam tape. I only put some foam tape in the middle of it and I folded the wings up just a bit to give it some movement. Now, whenever I have a fairy on a card, I usually add some glitter to the wings and I use my Wink of Stella brush pen for that. Now, with watercolor, this pen will reactivate the watercolor if you're not careful. That's why you see me clean off the brush pen in between on that scrap piece of cardstock. And I also go from the lightest area to the darkest on my wings, so as to not reactivate the darkest part of the watercolor and drag it over to the lightest area. And that pretty much finishes up my card. I am just folding a matching card base. I chose pink for this because the fairy has some pink in it, and I really like this as a super girly card. So I added a pink dotted pattern paper for the envelope. And it is patterned on both sides, which is not ideal because I don't think the pink on the inside matches my card, but the outside was pretty enough to make up for it. I glued that together with more of that Barely Art Precision Craft glue, and then the project is done. Lots of sparkle. The ink blending isn't perfect on this one, but sometimes that happens. Next time I will do it before die cutting, and that would solve the problem easily. I hope you still like the card, and I hope you liked the video. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up on this video and leave your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to read them. You can also subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.